Digital mediums have taken the photography world by storm in the recent day and age. In fact, you have a camera right now in your back pocket. This handy device allows you to capture hundreds of pictures and keep them with you wherever you go. However, there was a time when we didn't have modern luxuries such as autofocus, interchangeable lenses, and the ability to have all of your photos on one portable device. As a photographer myself, I've moved away from digital and began to explore film and other analog mediums of photography. This got me wondering, what came before modern cameras? I'm student producer and photographer Sam Bussey, and today we're going to deep dive into the history of cameras and how modern photography came to be. Now, the definition of a camera is a device with a lens and a shutter that produces an image onto a given medium. Whether that be a digital sensor, a frame of film, or really anything that can display an image. Well, a frame of film or modern camera sensor can fit into the palm of your hand. Camera technology wasn't always so small. In fact, the first cameras in history were entire rooms with a tiny hole in one wall which acted as the lens. This produced an inverted image of whatever was outside the pinhole on the opposite side of the room. These rooms were often used by artists as visual aids to help trace a scene onto a canvas. Eventually, these rooms turned into small boxes that could be taken with you and incorporated mirrors and lenses, which enabled the image to be projected onto a canvas and gave artists greater freedom in where they could create their art. It wouldn't be until years later that French artist Louis Daguerre coined the first light-sensitive medium, known as the daguerreotype. This medium involves the photographer coating a copper plate with a thin layer of silver. The entire development process has to be done in a completely dark room so that the daguerreotype isn't exposed to any light before the photo is taken. Once the copper plate has been coated, it gets loaded into a light-proof container to be transferred to the camera. To focus the image, the photographer would slide the plate forwards or backwards in the camera. Once the shot is in focus, the photographer would remove the lens cap for 5 to 15 minutes depending on the amount of light hitting the plate. During this time, the subject would have to stay as still as they could to make a clear, sharp image. This is the reason that smiling for pictures wasn't a common practice until years later. Eventually, the daguerreotype process was refined and photographers were able to capture an image in less than a minute. Once the photo has been taken, the photographer has to go back into the darkroom to develop the plate by exposing it to mercury vapor. Once developed, the plate is exposed to a sodium fixing agent to preserve the image. Because of the dangerous nature of processing daguerreotypes, photographs were taken almost exclusively by professionals until the 20th century. While the daguerreotype had many limitations, its use of chemical development, mirrors, and modern lenses paved the way for the next generation of photography. By the late 1880s, smaller consumer-grade cameras were becoming more and more common, but one company rose to the top of the market. Kodak Eastman came out with a camera design that was simple and affordable enough for almost anyone to use, called the Brownie. This film camera used a roll of film big enough to hold 6 exposures. This camera included a small viewfinder and a single-speed mechanical shutter. The ease of use and low cost of film caused photography to gain popularity in the general public. Once celluloid film became the standard medium for photography, companies like Kodak Eastman started to push for even smaller cameras and a smaller photosensitive medium. This resulted in the introduction of a smaller format of celluloid film called 35mm. The smaller size of this film made it so up to 36 exposures could fit onto a single roll. At this point in time, photographers had the option of choosing the film they wanted to shoot on. While different film stocks can give you a slightly different image, they all work on the same principle. Each frame of film is coated in microscopic, light-sensitive silver halide crystals. When these crystals are exposed to light, they react to form an image. The larger these crystals are, the more sensitive to light the film will be. However, with the added benefit of a higher sensitivity, the bigger crystals become easier to discern in the photo. This is something we all know as film grain. The look and feel you get from shooting on analog mediums like film is the reason so many people are still taking pictures on their old cameras. However, because these older cameras aren't being produced anymore, new film photographers rely on buying used cameras to shoot with. Unlike their modern digital counterparts, cameras from the past were built to be repaired as they got worn out. So with the help of some skilled hands and a little know-how, these old worn-out cameras can be refurbished to be used for years to come. Luckily, local camera shops like Retrospect have been breathing new life into cameras from the past for the next generation of photographers.
Why are people interested in this technology? I think it's a really nice counterbalance to how easy everything is now and how perfect everything can be, and the authenticity of something original that isn't manipulated and is your one shot at taking that photo. So for instant photography in particular, that is your one original copy, and it's unedited, and that's it. There's a real allure to that authenticity that is created from an instant image such as that, when you can very easily scroll online and find just perfect images of anything and everything.
Because parts for old cameras aren't being made anymore, camera shops rely on other means to get the parts they need to make repairs.
Oftentimes they're pulled from a unit itself, so a non-working unit. If we can't get it functional, we can at least get components from it, and we can test those components and make sure that they are going to work for as a replacement part. And then sometimes we can put together a bill of materials of replacement components such as capacitors, speakers, sometimes screens. It really depends on the part and the device it's going into. You buy 100 of something and maybe you get 60 of them to the finish line, and you have 40 that you can't do anything with, but those 40 gave life to the other 60 that were able to get out the door. And then there's other programs that are really well established that we do, in which we've actually reverse engineered replacement components for, and those are the least common denominator, in which if we didn't have them, we would have quite a high yield loss. Having them really allows us to move thousands more units in a year, which is what can justify those high costs for reverse engineering and injection molding. I love how well built a lot of this older tech is. I love the thought that went into designing something that could be taken apart and repaired, as really we moved into the late 90s and early 2000s, when it was just much cheaper to produce something that was never supposed to be taken apart, is really hard to even take apart. I remember the disappointment of growing up and transitioning to some of that tech and realizing that it had a lifetime to it or planned obsolescence. There's a group of individuals that I think really like our mission statement and like the idea that the camera they're buying prevents a new camera from ever needing to be manufactured. And if they're going to buy one anyways, why not support a company that's doing that and has that as a mission? Some of the SLR cameras, for example, I don't know that they could be built today for the price point that you can buy a used one for. They would be extremely expensive because you just don't have the scalability of that product anymore like you did maybe in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, when you had a really large consumer base. And now the consumer base is still there, it's just much smaller, and there's a lot of other options of used equipment for that user base as well. So I think there could be a variety of reasons why someone decides to purchase a used item, but those are a couple reasons in our opinion that someone may visit our shop.
While analog photography is an older form of technology, that doesn't mean it's not still used by professionals. When film is shot, developed, and scanned properly, you can still get high-fidelity images that stack up to their digital counterparts. The reason photographers still shoot on analog cameras is the unique look that film gives an image. In fact, many digital photographers will alter their photos, adjusting color and adding grain to emulate that sought-after vintage look that film gives you. So instead of trying to replicate film using digital cameras, photographers like Darius Smith have been shooting analog to get that vintage look.
I think film is actually having a really big resurgence. The biggest thing that drew me to film is just I wanted to get better. I wanted to get better with my work, and outside of just getting better, I want to have something that's a little bit more tangible. So with shooting, with shooting like digital, you can shoot 1,000 shots, and just because you shoot 1,000 shots, you get one good shot that makes you a good photographer. But with film, you actually have to take your time to learn how the camera works, learn about aperture, learn about all these different things, ISO, just to make sure you are getting really good shots. So for me, it was like slowing down and actually understanding each method of it. And it's a lot of science to it is what I realized. There's a lot of science to it, learning how light hits the camera, the golden hour, all these different things. So for me, it taught me just to slow it down and actually appreciate what photography really is and what it should be used for. I have ran through a lot of film, and say if I'm shooting with a 35 and I got 36 exposures, it's sometimes that it may be just one shot out of that 36 that's actually pretty good, but that comes with the territory. But that teaches you like, hey, I need to be a little bit more responsible about how I shoot, the subjects that I shoot, the light that I shoot, because all of that plays into like the film stock that you get. And it's expensive. That's the other part.
While editing film scans is easily done, a lot of film photographers try to keep their photos as close to the original as possible.
I don't want to edit my photos. I think at least for me, I think it defeats the purpose of me shooting film. If I'm gonna edit everything, I might as well shoot digital. So, only thing that I can say I really do is more so I may touch up a couple things if it's underexposed of my own fault. That's a photographer's error. I may just like change some contrast or the saturation just to get it back to how it should be. But outside of that, the saturation, the contrast, and the dust spots, that's about it. I think it just takes me back from being a kid when my mom used to buy me a disposable camera, take it to Walgreens, and you get back the photos. So I think that's one of the reasons why. I think we live in a world where everything is so digital that you forget how the film actually feels.
It wasn't until the first digital cameras started to be sold to the public that film photography started to fade in popularity. The first digital cameras were largely limited by image resolution and storage using floppy disks and rudimentary image sensors. Instead of using silver halide crystals to produce an image like film, digital cameras used an image sensor made from a semiconductor with microscopic lenses covering it. These micro lenses focus light to individual pixels on the semiconductor. The amount of pixels on a sensor determines the resolution of the camera, which is typically referred to as the megapixel count. Image sensors also vary in size depending on the camera model. The most commonly used size is full frame. A full frame sensor is the same size as a full frame of 35mm film. The reason for this is so photographers switching from film to digital could use the lenses they already had. In fact, DSLR cameras are almost identical to their film predecessors. Apart from using a digital image sensor, the internal mechanisms were essentially the same. DSLR stands for Digital Single Lens Reflex. What this means is that a mirror sits in front of the image sensor, redirecting light from the lens to the camera's viewfinder, allowing the photographer to see the exact image that will be taken. As soon as the shutter button is pressed, the mirror folds up, revealing the shutter, which exposes the image sensor for the desired amount of time. As technology evolved and camera manufacturers started to incorporate video and higher shutter speeds, the mirror became a bottleneck. By removing the mirror and adding an electronic viewfinder, cameras became much thinner and shutter speeds were cut in half, allowing even more flexibility for photographers. While digital cameras might not produce the same look that film does, the benefits they bring to the table are undeniable. With things like optical stabilization, wide ISO ranges and high dynamic range, photographers like Max Kinstler are able to get shots that would have never been possible using film.
There's a huge pressure to upgrade your gear. I feel it every single day. So one of the things is hardest for me is just to remind myself that I can do what I need to do with my camera, but it's important to learn and to keep up to date with the new technology. The first camera I remember handling or ever using was my grandpa's old camera after he passed away, and when we were going through some of his stuff, there was an extra camera left over. He was a painter and he used cameras to take pictures of the scenery that he would paint, and I ended up in possession of his Canon Power Shot, you know, whatever it was, one of the point and shoots. And that was the first camera I ever kind of had for myself to experiment with. The camera that I use and the setup that I use right now, I love Canon. I have shot Canon pretty much since I started in photography. Like I said, my first camera was a Canon, and I mainly do stills as of right now. So I shoot on a Canon 5D Mark IV. I am one of the last people in my current immediate friend group who is still shooting DSLR with a mirror. And ultimately, for me, what it comes down to is I shoot what I like and what I know. My 5D has been my powerhouse for years. It's what I know best. I can probably do it with my eyes closed. I know where my settings are and everything. So for ergonomic and timing reasons, I tend to use my 5D, but in order to stay up to date with the rest of everything else, it's really about being a part of the community that does this kind of stuff. How I end up approaching editing a project is really highly based on the actual shoot and how that went. The atmosphere that I like shooting the most and kind of the shots that I really enjoy getting the most pretty much are all luck. I have to wait for the weather to be like that, and I have to wait for the lighting to get just right, and I have to wait for the timing. So when I end up getting that shot, it's pretty much immediately how I know how I'm gonna edit it because I've already thought it through. When I approach the edit, usually what I like to do is tone the shadows down a little bit. I try to overexpose so that I can work a little bit with some of the shadows and the light that I do have. But really it's about taking whatever element that I did want to kind of frame up or highlight and toning down the rest of the image to make sure that the center or whatever I framed up is kind of what the person is looking at, what the audience is geared towards, and making sure that their eyes are kind of being led towards the subject of the photo. I really love symmetrical images, and when I look to set up a frame, I really love the negative space filling most of the image. I know a lot of people like busy images. I don't. I really enjoy center frame, and I guess I see myself using the rule of thirds quite a lot, but for the most part, for my photos, I love center framing and using the negative space to fill the rest, because I really like that foggy feeling of kind of being in the abyss, kind of maybe underwater, how you can't tell what's up and what's down. I really enjoy that sensation, that feeling, so I try to emulate that in some of the photos that I take. There's always going to be situations where you come into a room and you see the lighting and it's awful, or you're out at night and the fog goes away. And it's whether or not you decide to change up your game plan or stick with your guns and just do what you were gonna do anyway. I try really hard to stay on my toes in situations where the lighting gets tough or where I'm sort of out of ideas, and just be able to think fresh, go a different direction than what I was originally thinking, because ultimately, like I said earlier, all of my photos are lucky. I have to wait for months until I get a day like, some of those nights where the fog is super thick, and I go out and I shoot until 4 until the fog is gone, because that's the only time I get those photos. So it's really just about taking advantage of the light that you get, the good light, and just being okay with not getting exactly what you wanted and experimenting and learning when the lighting gets tough.
There's no denying that modern cameras make it easier to get the perfect shot every time you press the shutter. But the slow, involved experience you get from taking pictures on analog cameras is why so many photographers continue to use them. At the end of the day, it's up to you to decide which medium of photography is right for you. With the evolving technology in cameras, there's unlimited possibilities of what the future will hold for photographers. I'm student producer and photographer Sam Bussey. Thanks for watching Framing History.